Talkex, ordinary to extraordinary. Welcome to the show. On the show, we have an amazing lady who has 20 years of global HR experience. We're talking about hiring to firing. We're talking about toxic leadership. We're talking about women empowerment. We're talking about diversity. Let's get into her mind and understand how HR truly works. We have Hattie He on the show, Talkex, ordinary to extraordinary. I'm your host, Rohit Bassi. Welcome to the show, Hattie. Truly appreciate you being over here. Just for the audience, just for the listeners, just a brief background about who you are, what you do, and then we'll deep dive into the whole interview with you.
Okay, I'm Hattie He. I came to Dubai about 5 years ago. I was working in Australia for nearly 30 years, which is a long time. Always been in an HR role, so I was look after Asia Pacific HR, worked for different industry, medical device, IT, FMCG, involved in a lot of HR activities, including mergers, acquisitions, joint venture, manufacturing.
Wow.
So that's all kind of my background. And now I'm joining the fragrance industry.
It's a completely different, an array of so many different industries. And I'm sure HR being a major part in all of those industries, but could also be different in each of them, which we'll talk about in a while. Yeah. Before we go into that, I just want to clarify one thing. I hear, it doesn't matter where I've been in the globe, be it over here in the Far East, even in Australia or back in the UK, HR is just a glorified admin job. It's just policing. What are your thoughts on that? Because you have literally grown in the industry.
Yeah. It's an interesting question. I think you got to go back and look at how HR transformed from the 80s and 90s, and it's purely personnel HR management. And those times, the HR function basically manage people onboarding, people's files, all administrative work and policies. And I think the transformation started probably in the 2000. After 2000, HR started become involved in business strategies, forecasting, commercial decisions, when there is mergers, acquisition happening and joint venture, or certain multinational companies started thinking about what HR can add value to the business rather than just purely admin policing activities.
And the other thing which I've noticed about HR is we don't know where to put this responsibility, throw it to HR.
Of course.
How do you cope with that?
Well, of course, HR always get blamed, right? So if nothing happening, it's HR fault. We hear that a lot.
Yeah.
What we tend to do is trying to make sure the roles and responsibility of employee and managers to be clear in terms of who's responsible for what. And HR is there to give the explanation, advice, make sure the policies understand correctly, all the company's guidelines is clear to employee and managers, and who does what, who is making decision call, what they can get from HR, how HR add value to their decision making. I think from that perspective, it's easy to not everything come to HR, and some of the managers do want HR to say no because they don't want to say no to people. We got to teach and educate a line manager how do they have a tougher conversations. We can certainly help advise them, but they're the ones managing people. They got to be the one do the work.
Okay, so what I'm literally hearing from you saying is, when I look at the word, you can advise them, you can guide them, or you can coach them, but they have to take the action and implement it, and you're there to help them implement it, but they have to take that one step forward.
Correct,
okay,
correct.
Great.
I often said to some of the line managers is they don't report to HR, they report to you. You are the one accountable, responsible for your employee in terms of cares from duties perspective, from guiding, mentor and coaching your staff.
When we're looking at HR, I've seen in many organizations, and look, things have evolved in HR, things have evolved in everything. And HR is still not considered a part of strategy. It's not considered still to be in the board. It's still sidelined. What are your thoughts of being HR, being on the board with, getting involved in strategy? Why is it important, or is it not even important for them to be there?
Certain organization has transferred the HR function from more administrative HR, purely HR people management, to more strategic, because the company will make a certain business strategy and decisions. How does the HR function aligned, or the HR strategy to be aligned with the business strategy is critical.
Yes.
Because all the technologies, every company can do the same. People can easily copy, but it's a difficult. The people is assets. It's the people makes the difference in terms of the business success, or how business manage its strategy directions, in a sense, right? So I think from that perspective, I often hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, HR need a seat on the board," and I often ask myself, what do HR provide values to the business? If you can prove yourself to provide valuable input to business, then you will be invited to the board. But if you still stuck in the HR policing admin type of work, then of course, you're not going to be on the board.
Okay, so when we're looking at this in terms of HR, an organization year to year, they have goals and they have objectives, they have their vision, mission. In fact, I would say many organizations don't even have a vision whatsoever. But just looking at the objectives which an organization has, how do HR help or ensure that the organization is reaching those objectives, getting to those objectives? Let's say one of the objectives of the year is we need to have a growth of $1 million, just as an example. How is HR going to get involved in it? What have they got to do with getting that 1 million into the organization? What do they do?
Yeah. So there is a number of aspects. First, you got to understand the business strategy and whether you want to achieve, say, for example, 1 million EBITDA or profitability. Where did that coming from? Is that from your existing business operating in existing countries, or you got to have a business expansion to other geo-demographics and locations, right? And taking from that examples, look at what you currently have in terms of workforce capability perspective, knowledge perspective. Then you think about, how do I acquire certain knowledge, because it's the gap we don't have. For example, if you want to go set up business in Saudi, what's the knowledge do you have? Are you going to have a business legal entity in Saudi, or are you going to just send a couple of people, hiring a couple of distributors and agency to test water, see how that works, right? Then that's come back to HR. How do we have a people in terms of in a certain countries, and how do we ensure what we want to do, we have the capabilities? Sometimes you can move people from internally to go into the other locations and set up the business. Other times you got to recruit people locally to deliver the business need. So whatever HR strategy got to link to your business strategy, basically you have the business goals, you have objectives. HR is to think from people, resources, capability perspective. How do we execute that strategy? How do we make sure that happens? What's the legal aspect and company responsibility perspective that we need to consider?
Okay. We're here at Exceed College. We're on this show, Talkex, Ordinary to Extraordinary. Exceed is all about online learning. We're talking about MBAs and doctorates and other professional qualifications. You yourself did an MBA, and this was in Australia. And I see a lot of people doing MBA. I just want to know, is it worth doing an MBA?
Yes, absolutely. So I did my MBA back in 1999, very early days. I think at that trend, it was a bit of a trend for people to do MBA to progress to gain the knowledge that they needed, because the undergrad degree perhaps not enough for them to progress within the organization, or you can say it's a corporate ladder, right? For me at the time, I thought I had a first degree, undergrad degree. I only know certain aspects of job functions and certain business activities. I want to know more, and the only way the MBA courses will give you a lot of different aspects, from finance to marketing to sales to operations to technology. So give you a whole range of business theory than you don't normally get from the undergrad. I think the most beneficial thing for me when I went through the MBA, those days we don't have online, it's all face to face, right? We labor through, including a lot of weekends. Everything is face to face in the classroom. The most valuable experience I have is interact with those classmates. We learn a lot from each other. Everyone coming from different background, different job functions, different specialties. When we have the assignment group, and that's really, you learn a lot from the classroom you can't learn. And I think for MBA students, and learn from your peers or colleagues is really important.
So which makes me wonder now that Exceed focuses on online learning, and as we're talking, what would you say to the students of Exceed? How would you guide them in, how do they, yes, you've got your online interaction, but what do they do in order to interact in other ways? What possibly could they do?
Yeah, world has changed, right?
Yeah.
Things has changed. I mean, early days you do have e-learning, which you're trying to put a lot of things through the video interactions and video learnings. The COVID, the pandemic, completely shifted everything to online learning. So I think that's a part of the new life in terms of you got to learn a lot of things through online. I would say that's all great, fantastic. You can do a lot of things technology-wise through online, but you still got to have some kind of physical human being interactions. Whether you do that once a year or half year, I think the physical get together to sit down, have a lunch, have a coffee, have a chat, and that's important. And I think probably some of the online learnings missing that part. And that's for college, like purely online, they may need to consider that maybe they have an annual event to get all the students together so they can see each other, they can have that physical interactions.
Okay. So that physical interaction is crucial. Now, you're a global HR director currently,
Yeah.
and you're dealing with people from South America, UK, Europe, Far East, obviously in the Middle East. In terms of with your organization, how do you promote learning over there? Or is it crucial for your organization to have learning?
Yes, absolutely, it's crucial. I think when people join the organization, many brings different experience, different background. We do have a lot of students, graduates joining the organization. As the business grow, and sometimes you kind of grow out of your own skills and knowledge. How do you keep the learning? What we tend to do is identify the gaps, identify from technical aspect, also from competency behavioral aspect. What do we need to do? We do have a certain annual events, learning like compliance training. You do need to get everyone through, for example, anti-bribery training, respectful workplace, right? So you do want people to understand those compliance issues. Then of course come to technical related training, which different job functions will organize that. And then of course the skill gaps. How do you have a communication? How do you manage people? How do you do performance appraisal discussions? Those are the things that we need to train people to be able to do that so they become effective leaders. And also we tend to have a lot of internal promotions. learning is one thing, but on-the-job training is another. How do you get them to rotate, to experience different job functions, different activities, and different knowledge? We also move people from one country to another country so they get a bit of understanding the local culture. How do they do business? Because it's very different from Asian countries to European countries to Middle East.
With all this happening, and because it's a global organization, there must be an element of online happening somewhere over here to get people aligned. I mean, I love the the physical interaction, but there are times where you have to get them aligned, and the quickest and easiest way is to do online. And what is the emphasis from your side, or even if you would say to people out there who are running the organizations from a HR perspective, how much emphasis should be done on the online side of things?
It's difficult these days because of the COVID situation. We do a lot of online meetings almost every week, and we even run our board meeting online, which never happens before COVID. You know, we get a physical together, the board members sit down, have a discussion. We're moving from one country to another to experience a different, business. But since the COVID, we'll do that online. What we tend to do is cross countries, global meetings, you have to do online because there is still travel restrictions. You can't physically travel from one location to another. What we're trying to ensure is the local team find a possibility in time that have the physical interactions together. When we do the team meetings, the local people can be in the meeting room. Of course, if the COVID legislation allowed them to do that. So we try to mix up the difference between purely online meeting and how can we manage a certain physical human interactions as well.
Okay, great. Going on to another topic, in HR, talent acquisition, I'm not going to call it recruitment, I would prefer calling it talent acquisition because that's what you need the organization to run. What is your emphasis for organizations out there who are looking at talent acquisition? What is the best way for them to do that? How could they possibly achieve that? Because usually what I see is just give it to an agency, they'll bring someone on. And what I've also noticed is the line managers not getting involved. And when somebody comes into the organization, suddenly it's like, the person looked great on CV, was great in interview, but they're not offering us anything. So what is the guidance you could give people out there in terms of that talent acquisition? How do you get on board? How do you actually get proper talent on board?
Yeah. So I always do, and then has been my sort of guiding principles, hiring the right person for the right job. There is a number of critical steps that people got to follow. I know there's a lot of people out there, they don't want to follow those process, and they will learn from their own mistakes, right? The number one thing is you need to define the job. What do you need for the role, for the person, from technical, behavioral, team culture fit aspect. And that requires a conversation from hiring manager, HR, to understand what exactly we're looking for. Then you got to brief the agency if you use agency, and then you review, interview the candidates, trying to match what you already defined. A tendency people tend to make is they meet someone, perhaps not meet the job requirement, but they have a good personal vibes and they just gonna hire the person. Often that's HR or my talent acquisition specialist got come in and ask the question, does that person meet the requirement when we first defined? If it doesn't, has the role changed? Because sometimes the role can change because of the business change, right? So you always got to match the individual with what you require to ensure you get the right person for the right role. Otherwise, it may not work.
and which comes down to is you're doing your talent acquisition, you're doing your talent development management. Diversity plays a part in it, and people talk about diversity. But how do you ensure there's diversity in the organization? Because sometimes you say, oh, you got to have X number of women, X number of men, X number of nationality. But if people are not meeting the criteria, should they really be a part of the organization? Should you be hiring them just because you want to look good in media that you're doing diversity?
For me, it's no. I think I always go back to, is this person match what I'm looking for? Match the job requirement, match the business need, match the team culture. If the person, yes, I don't really care. You're male, female, old and young or different color. To me, that doesn't matter. The main thing is, does this person meet the job requirement? And sometimes you may not get 100% fit. No one is perfect, right? Then you got to ask your question in terms of where certain areas we can compromise. Is this person trainable? Does this person has potential to learn, to master the skills they may not have, but it's critical to the business? These are the questions, and of course, it's judgment call. But I think those colors, age, gender, it shouldn't be in the recruitment requirement in the first place. However, I understand that certain jobs do have a physical requirement. If you're working in a warehouse or factory, you may need to require to lift a 25 kg. And then you got to ask, is that the person can lift a 25 kg? If it's a women can lift a 25 kg, does that matter?
Absolutely.
So that's kind of the things you got to really goes back to what is a job requirement. I know I have some agency approach me. They want to provide the services where they submit the candidates and without the surname or without the certain personal background. And I said, no, I don't need that. From my HR team perspective, I tell them in terms of to look for the right people for the right role. It doesn't matter where they're coming from.
Great. And this comes to the other thing is when you're looking at this is, and I've been hearing this for a long time, is women empowerment. Women empowerment. And I have my thoughts about it. I want to understand, you being a woman, I'm not a woman, so I can't really, say much about it. But what is your thoughts about when you hear organizations or people talk about, or they give their speech on women empowerment? What are your thoughts when it comes to women empowerment in the workplace and also outside the workplace?
I don't know. Often I ask, why do women specifically need empowerment? I'm a woman. I don't think I need someone to give me empowerment. I have my own authority. I have my own empowerment. I can give myself, empowerment. Yes, certainly it's been a trend, and there's a lot of whether there's public listed company or private company, they all want to have certain gender balance and percentage and women in the leadership. I think you got to look at whether the women meet the job requirement. Can they do the job? If they can do the job, does it matter if it's a woman, right? And also, a lot of companies do the Women in Leadership program.
Yes.
And I have done one of those ones which I organized and invited a third party to come in. We did because of the company's requirement, and we need to do this. So we did that, and the program was so successful. I have men leaders come to me saying, why this program for women? Why not for men? So it's a different perspective.
Then it's like men empowerment now.
Exactly. So then they feel they missed out. They go, well, why you always do the programs for women? And how we are leaders too. We need those kind of trainings too. So I think it's a different. I do understand there is women tend to be overlooked for certain positions because their career, their family commitment. But at the same time, I often think, when a promotion opportunity came up, if a woman and a man both apply the position, is that because women didn't get the position? Is that because she's a woman? Or is because there are certain skills gaps? And same thing, if man didn't get a position, would anyone question and challenge, say, he didn't get the position because he's a man? No, we don't say that, right? So I think it's a mentality, it's mindset. I understand that certain women need a certain support, but for me, I don't want. I was hired for a senior position because I'm Asian, because I'm a woman. I want to be hired because I'm capable. I can do my job.
Great.